The young prince stood before the window overlooking his private garden, his back to the advisors. A breathtaking riot of flowers filled his sight, their brilliance contrasting with the darkness that befell them. He let the sight steady him before he spoke. "The other races?" he asked, his voice low but clear. "Nothing," Duke Albrecht replied, his tone grave, heavy with finality. The prince's back straightened just a fraction. His eyes dimmed as he lowered his head, a single lock of hair falling over his brow. "Could they be in hiding?" he asked, almost as if hoping someone would confirm it. Silence gripped the room for a long moment, the weight of it pressing against the walls. "We cannot rule out the possibility," the interior minister finally answered, but there was little hope in his tone, betraying what his words would not. He believed the others gone. The prince drew in a deep breath and turned slowly, his face a careful mask of confidence despite the blow that had been dealt his kingdom. "I see." His voice rang firmer now, resolute. "We will proceed with the assumption that we are all that is left." His eyes met each of his cabinet in turn. Some looked away, others gave him curt nods. When their gazes locked with his, he imagined they saw a young man forcing himself to be steel for them all, his shoulders set, his stance unyielding. "How many of our enclaves survived?" The interior minister opened the file before him, though the prince knew the man had already committed every line to memory. 37 of the smaller ones survived long enough for the barriers to be erected, he said, voice clipped. The finance minister cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "That number is fragile, Your Highness. Many of these enclaves will not sustain themselves through winter without redistribution of resources. And redistribution," Duke Albrecht added darkly, "will spark resentment. Those who believe they have suffered more will not take kindly to sharing with those who fled faster." The prince's gaze hardened. "Then they will learn, Your Grace. If we are all that remain, division will kill us faster than famine." "Spoken like an idealist," Albrecht muttered. The prince's jaw tightened. Better an idealist who keeps his people alive than a cynic who buries them. A tense silence fell again. The advisors exchanged wary glances. Finally, the defense minister broke it. "Your Highness, the truth is we are surrounded by enemies who outnumber us. We must prepare for the worst." The prince stepped closer to the table, the light from the window casting him in shadow. "Then let us prepare. But we do so as one kingdom, one people. From this day, survival is our law." His words lingered in the chamber, a quiet challenge to the doubt etched on the faces before him. The interior minister's fingers tapped the file in front of him, a nervous staccato. "The castle's vaults and cellars are still stocked, enough for our household and garrison for many seasons. We can use what we have to help our remaining people. But once redistribution begins," he hesitated. "It will draw eyes," the finance minister finished for him. He adjusted his spectacles again, the glass catching the light. "We can disguise some of the movements, but bulk transport cannot go unnoticed forever. The humans watch the ruins. They know something survived." The magic barrier that had been erected cast the perfect illusion. The castle lying in ruins, nothing more than ash and rubble. It looked like a grave, silent and forgotten. But within, the truth was far stranger. The castle and its village were still bustling unseen by the outside world. The air shimmered faintly along the barrier, like heat rising from stone, and beyond that veil, nothing could breach their sanctuary. No blade, spell, or army. Their world now existed slightly outside the main flow of time, unreachable to others. No force from the outside could ever breach its walls again. For the first time in centuries, they were untouchable, and yet safety came at a bitter price. His people walked their halls with heavy steps, always aware of the destruction beyond the barrier. They had seen too much, lost too much, and the lesson seared into their hearts was one that would never fade: trust no human. Their betrayal was the reason the kingdom bled. The prince often found himself staring at the shimmering veil, wondering if survival outside of time was victory or merely another kind of prison. His lips pressed into a thin line. "So, you suggest we let our enclaves starve?" "Not starve," Duke Albrecht cut in, his voice carrying its usual iron. "Endure. Endure until we know the strength of our walls, until the human's suspicion fades. A lean season is survivable. Exposing ourselves is not." A sharp breath escaped the Secretary of Defense. Unlike the others, her voice was calm, level too calm. "Do you think the barriers will hold?" The prince swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. His father's face, bloodied and resolute, flashed before him. "My father gave his life to ensure those barriers went up. They will hold." His tone allowed no other alternative, and no one dared to contradict him. But the silence that followed was thick with doubt. The finance minister leaned forward. Your Highness, even if the barriers hold, hunger will make our people reckless. Rumors will spread, desperation breeds betrayal, and if even one of them slips to the humans, then we are all undone, Albrecht finished grimly. The prince raised his chin, his voice cutting through the heavy air. Then we will not let them grow desperate. The interior minister frowned. How do you propose to feed 37 enclaves without alerting the humans? Caravans would be too large, messengers too slow. Smaller shipments, the prince said firmly. Quiet ones, carried by those who can travel unseen, hunters, scouts, people with reason to walk the old roads. Runners, the defense secretary murmured. Albrecht scoffed, children's tales. Runners are nothing but relics from the wars of old. The prince's eyes sharpened. Relics kept my father's line alive when your grandfather swore we were finished. Do not dismiss what you do not understand, your grace. Albrecht bristled but said nothing more. The prince's voice softened, but steel threaded through it. We will begin redistribution. Carefully, quietly. If we must bleed the castle dry to keep our enclaves alive, then so be it. Better a starving kingdom than an empty one. His words rang with finality, echoing against the vaulted ceiling. None of the advisors spoke again, though unease sat heavy on their expressions. The prince turned back to the window, the riot of flowers beyond a cruel reminder of what abundance looked like and how swiftly it could vanish. We should talk about your coronation, sire. The seneschal's voice broke the silence, cracking it as if it were glass. The young prince closed his eyes, his chest tightening at the title. Sire, a title that should have belonged to his father, spoken now as though the crown had already passed. His father's laughter, his steady hand upon his shoulder, the lessons spoken under starlight, all of it rose in his mind like a fresh wound reopened. Losing him was like carrying a knife lodged deep within his heart, twisting with every breath. When he opened his eyes again, they gleamed with unshed grief, but his voice was steady. We will have to hold it as soon as possible. Our people need to see more than a throne left empty. They need hope, proof that despite our losses, we still stand. Very good, sire, the seneschal replied, his tone pleased. The word echoed again in the chamber, settling heavily over the council. None of them spoke, but each knew the truth that clung to the air like smoke. Their kingdom had been brought to its knees, their king slain, their numbers dwindled. The barrier around their home held firm, shielding them from human eyes and blades, but it was a fragile miracle, not a promise of eternity. The prince's gaze drifted to the village below the castle hill. Beyond it, the veil shimmered faintly, as though the world outside were nothing but a mirage. Safe, yes, but safety could not silence the restless stir in their blood, nor the memory of betrayal that had driven them here. We must endure, the prince said softly, almost to himself. His hands clenched at his sides. We must endure, and when the time comes, we will rise again. He turned to face his people, his face resolute. Around the table, his council bowed their heads, but not in mourning. A low sound rippled through the chamber, deep, resonant, unearthly. It was not speech, but something older, something that belonged to the marrow of their being. The air itself seemed to tremble with it. The prince's throat burned as he held it back, but he did not silence the others. His grief sharpened, his heart thundering as the call threatened to tear free from his chest. For theirs was no ordinary kingdom, no fragile line of men clinging to stone walls and titles. They were the children of the moon, the wolves in the dark, a people who would never again bow to human treachery. And when the howl finally rose, it shook the chamber with the sound of their truth. They were werewolves, and their time had not yet ended.
Staring up at the ceiling could get boring, but hey, what else was there to do? I wasn't one of those people who spent their lives glued to their phones, and I didn't have a family, so... Well, I had a family, just not my family. My parents were gone. They died in a plane crash 6 years ago. There hadn't been any foul play or anything like that, just a couple who had flown into bad weather for reasons no one ever managed to explain. You can imagine the complex that left me with. Afterward, my father's younger brother had taken over as alpha of our pack. He already had a wife, 2 sons, and a daughter, and I could tell from the start they hadn't been thrilled about taking me in. I wasn't abused or anything, no bruises or screaming matches, but I wasn't wanted either. I was just tolerated, like a piece of furniture nobody had chosen but couldn't quite get rid of. My room hadn't changed much since before the crash. The walls were still the pale I had painted when I was 10, with tiny brushstrokes in the corners where she tried to hide mistakes. The shelves along one wall still sagged under the weight of books I'd collected over the years, most of them with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. My desk was cluttered with notebooks, pens, and the occasional sketch I hadn't bothered to throw away. It should have felt comforting, familiar, but the space carried a hollow sort of echo. The bed was the same one I'd slept in since childhood, with a quilt my mom had sewn draped across it. I used to think it was the coziest place in the world, but lately the quilt just reminded me that her hands would never smooth it over my shoulders again. Little reminders of my parents lingered everywhere. My dad's old alarm clock that I still used, the framed photo on my nightstand of us at the lake. There was even a faint scent of cedar clinging to the floorboards because he'd insisted on refinishing them himself. It was still my room, and yet it was. Without them, the warmth had drained out, leaving it feeling like a shrine I was never quite ready to walk away from. So yeah, staring at the ceiling might have been boring, but it beat thinking about everything I had lost, beat the reminders that I didn't belong. You must be wondering why I didn't become alpha of my pack. Well, that's simple enough. Werewolves shift at 16, sometimes a little later, but never past their 18th birthday. That's the cutoff. No wolf has ever shifted after that. By rights, I was supposed to take over as alpha once I shifted. Not that I would have held the real power, the elders would still have run things, at least for a while. I'd just have been the figurehead, the heir everyone pointed to as proof of the pack's future. Until then, my uncle served as a sort of alpha regent, if that's even a thing. The problem was I didn't shift. 16 came and went, and while everyone else my age was running through the forest on 4 paws, testing out their wolves' voices, I stayed human. It was humiliating. Being alpha blood and wolfless is like being royalty without a crown. People didn't say it outright, but I could feel it. The pity, the whispers, the looks that slid away when I walked into a room. At first I told myself it was fine. Late bloomers existed. The stories were rare, but they were there. Wolves who shifted on the edge of 17, sometimes even later. So I waited. I endured the glances, the careful silence when I approached, the way old friends slowly drifted out of my orbit. I held on to the hope that my wolf was simply biding her time, that she'd come to me one moonlit night and prove them all wrong. But 3 weeks ago, on my 18th birthday, nothing happened. No bones cracked, no fur burst through my skin, no voice rose in my head, just silence. And silence in my world was damning. Overnight, I went from the heir of the pack to its greatest shame. People muttered, traitor, when they thought I couldn't hear, as if I'd chosen this, as if I'd turned my back on them by not having a wolf. The shift I had no control over had defined me more than anything I'd ever done, and in their eyes I'd failed. So here I was, the alpha who would never be alpha, the girl who betrayed her pack simply by existing. And that's the other thing, my hearing was phenomenal. Werewolves are known for their senses, sure, but mine went beyond that. It wasn't something I grew up with. It started the night of my 18th birthday when the moon rose and everyone waited for me to shift. The silence in my head had been crushing, but then something else filled it. At first I thought I was going crazy. I could hear the scrape of mice in the forest, the clink of silverware being put away in the pack house kitchen, even the soft thrum of my cousin's heart as he dozed off in his rooms. Every sound was layered one over another until it became a deafening roar. I remember clapping my hands over my ears and still hearing everything. The whispers were the worst. People had gathered, expecting a ceremony, expecting my wolf to appear in a blaze of power. Instead, they got nothing. I got muttered voices I couldn't block out. She's not shifting. It's over. What will happen to us now? I wanted to scream at them that I could hear every word, that their pity and scorn were drilling holes in me. But I stayed silent, shaking under the weight of it all. By morning, I'd learned to focus, to sift through the noise until I could pick out details no one else could have caught. A bee buzzing in the garden outside, the uneven breath of a pack mate lying about where they'd been, the hesitation in my uncle's voice when he told me it wasn't my fault, most of all, the pleasure he tried to hide. Everyone thought I was powerless, but my hearing, this strange, impossible gift, told me otherwise. I just didn't know what it made me. Liath is the majority shareholder. My uncle's voice intruded on me. I shot upright in bed, heart slamming against my ribs. My eyes darted around my room, searching the shadows. When had he come in? But the room was empty. Empty and silent, except for his voice, which was as clear as if he stood right beside me. Yes, my aunt replied, her tone thoughtful, measured. Our shares in O Sluakadhain are not enough to live on. My blood iced over, my breath hitching painfully in my chest and sticking there. My heart refused to beat until the resulting ache forced it into a frantic, uneven rhythm. I swallowed, but my throat was bone dry, my tongue as heavy as stone. "We need those shares," Uncle Patrick concluded, his voice clipped decisive. "I don't think she'll ever sign them over to us," Aunt Florence said flatly. A rush of outrage flared in me, heating my face, but I didn't dare move. I pressed my palms hard into my quilt, straining, desperate to catch every word. It felt like breathing too loud might sever the connection, might silence the voices and leave me in the dark. "We could trick her into signing her rights away," Patrick suggested. My stomach lurched. "Trick me?" My fists curled against the quilt. There was a pause, a long, thoughtful, dangerous one. When Florence finally spoke, her voice was cool and certain. "No, she's too clever to sign anything without fully understanding it. She was raised to be an alpha after all." The faintest tremor ran through me. They knew that much at least. They knew I wasn't a fool. "You're right," Patrick said after a beat. His tone had softened, resigned. "You realize there's only one option, don't you?" Florence's words were like cold, hard steel, slow and deliberate. My uncle sighed, a long, weary exhale that made my skin crawl, but he didn't argue, didn't deny it. "We'll have to plan it just right," he admitted. "Leah doesn't do anything dangerous, so..." His voice trailed, heavy with implication. "A car accident," Florence supplied, her tone disturbingly casual. "She's not a werewolf, so they'll believe she couldn't heal." The world tilted beneath me. My body went numb, my mind screaming though I made no sound. They weren't just after my shares. The quilt slipped from my hands as if my strength had drained out of me. My chest tightened until I could barely draw breath. They were planning to kill me. Not just thinking it, not just idly speculating. Planning it. I shook my head hard, refusing to let the words sink their claws into me. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe this hearing, this impossible curse was just feeding me some twisted nightmare. But no, the words blazed, too sharp to be my imagination. My aunt's cool, calculating voice and my uncle's resigned sigh had been clear. Hot tears welled in my eyes, they strung. I pressed my fists against my ears, desperate to block them out. But the voices were gone anyway, as if someone had flicked off a switch. My room was silent again, achingly so. The quiet was loud. I lurched off the bed and stumbled to the window, throwing it open. Crickets chirped in the garden below. The soft murmur of a television drifted from the living room. Normal sounds, safe sounds. "Please," I whispered into the night air, my voice trembling. "Please let me be imagining things." I held my breath, straining, reaching for that strange connection again. For a moment, nothing. Then, "She'll suspect if we rush it," Aunt Florence said, her voice thin and distant, as though carried on some hidden current. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the windowsill, my nails digging into the wood. The world tilted again, and this time there was no denying it. I wasn't imagining, I wasn't broken. Well, maybe I was, but I was hearing the truth. And the truth was that my family wanted me dead. I fell onto my knees and cried. Why? The pack was rich. Uncle Patrick, as the confirmed alpha, had a share in that wealth. Sluaghain, on the other hand, was a company my father founded. He had given Patrick some shares in it, but it seemed he wanted more. I lay curled on the floor, my back pressed against the cool plaster. My hands shook so badly I tucked them under my arms to still them. No, it couldn't be real. Uncle Patrick, Aunt Florence, they weren't warm or loving, but murder. That was insane. That was something found in dark stories, not spoken aloud in my own house. Not about me. I forced a laugh out of my dry throat, thin and shaky. Yeah, right, sure. Accident. The words sounded hollow in the empty room. Even I didn't believe them. The silence pressed in again, heavy and absolute, and it was worse than hearing their voices. My pulse pounded in my ears, filling the void. I dragged my quilt off the bed and wrapped it tight around myself, as if that could shield me, as if it still held a trace of my mother's protection. They would. But I couldn't shake Aunt Florence's voice, cold and matter-of-fact. You realize there's only one option. I buried my face in my knees and bit down hard on my lip to keep from sobbing. If I broke down, if I made a sound, maybe they'd hear me, maybe they'd know I knew. And then what? I stayed like that for what felt like hours, listening, waiting, praying the voices would come back so I could prove myself wrong. They didn't. Just the ordinary noises of a house at night, the creak of pipes, the faint tick of my father's old alarm clock, the occasional sigh of the wind against the window. Each sound scraped against my nerves. Each one reminded me I was awake, that this wasn't some nightmare I could blink away. I didn't dare sleep. Chapter 2. The week had been hell. There was no other way to describe it. I was afraid, constantly so, and not a single person I could trust. The weight of what I knew pressed on me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. Dragging myself to the mirror above my dresser, I gripped the sides like I might topple if I let go. The girl staring back hardly looked like me at all. My honey-blonde curls, usually soft, springy, and annoyingly prone to catching the light, hung limp and dull, the strands clinging together as if they'd given up. My eyes, normally an unusual stormy grey that used to spark comments, looked flat now, ringed with bruised shadows that no amount of makeup could cover. And my skin, once smooth and pale like poured milk, had taken on a sallow, sickly tint. I looked terrible. I'd always been careless with my beauty, too busy and distracted to think much about it. Boys had noticed me, girls had envied me, and I'd shrugged it all off. It had simply been part of who I was, the same way being my father's daughter, the Alpha's heir, had been. But now I would kill to be that girl again. The one who roared with laughter and slept without fear. To be the girl who never looked twice at her reflection because she never doubted what she would see. As I touched the skin under my eyes, a chill crept through me. My family had to see how I looked. They had to have noticed the dark circles, the shaking hands, the way I startled at every sound. So why hadn't they said anything? Why hadn't they asked questions? The obvious answer sat in my stomach like a stone. Maybe they already knew why. Maybe they knew that I'd overheard them and they were simply waiting. But then how would they suspect I had heard them? I still couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that the soundproofing in the walls meant nothing to me now. My gaze drifted back to the mirror, to the haunted stranger looking back at me. I was supposed to be leaving for college in another week. It was a fresh start, a new city, a place where no one cared if I'd never shifted. I'd clung to that thought for months. But now it felt like a countdown, a clock ticking towards something inevitable. What if that was when it was supposed to happen? My accident, the moment they made their move. My hands gripped the dresser so tight my knuckles whitened. Fear fluttered in my chest. I couldn't shake the image my mind came up with. Headlights too bright, a sudden screech of tires, glass shattering around me. My family's voices ringing in my head afterwards. She wasn't a wolf. She couldn't heal. My eyes snapped open. One more week, that's all I had left. That is, if I didn't do something. And the only thing I could think to do was leave. But how? After the war, when our people were nearly destroyed and the enclaves went up, they'd made the barriers absolute. Each one now holds 10 packs. It had taken 1,000 years to stitch things back together, and the Alphas guarded those seams with everything they had. No one crossed a barrier without authorization. Even stepping near one without the right papers tripped alarms, lights, the sort of thing that brought half a council down on you before you could blink. Moving to the window, I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and watched the yard. There was a maze before the Alpha house, one of those old-fashioned, stately ones. Light pooled against its front hedges, leaving the rest in darkness, giving it an eerie, ethereal feeling. I watched a fox skitter across it and vanish into its shadow. The house slept, trusting and normal. It was the kind of night that should have felt safe. It felt poisonous now. Our pack, Crystal Moon, was at the edge of the Moon Enclave. Large forestlands bordered the packs, and there was an even larger piece of land between them and the barrier. There was only one road leading to it from the pack, one with a lot of checkpoints. If I ran straight for the barrier, someone would see me. If I tried to steal a car, the trackers would flag it. If I bribed a guard, whom would I bribe? Who could I trust not to tell my uncle? The list got shorter every time I tried to think it through. So I did what I'd been doing since my hearing came awake. I listened. There were routines in everything. As an Alpha heir, I knew them, now I heard them all. Footsteps on the back stairs at 2 a.m, the gardener's whistle at dawn, the patrol schedule the warriors used when they did rounds, soft leather shoes, the click of keys, the murmured checklist. A dangerous idea crept into my head and refused to leave. It wouldn't be an easy escape, but if I timed it right, I'd slip through the cracks. There were secret passages, tunnels beneath the old estate, service passages Dad had taken me through when I was younger. I'd forgotten about them until tonight, until fear had me remember it all. I thought of the college departure schedule pinned to the kitchen notice board, the train leaving at noon 1 week from now. Would it be easy to slip into the crowd then? to disappear on the public platform and melt into a sea of strangers. It would certainly be easier than trying to outrun alphas and avoid the automated sensors here. My palms dampened on the windowsill. Though the calculations in my mind were clinical, my body trembled. I may have been trained to be an alpha, but I wasn't used to being isolated and hunted, to having no one to bounce ideas off. Maybe I could fake an illness, a sudden seizure, make them keep me home. But what then? A week in bed would only give them more time to arrange something else. I dug my nails into my palm until the sting made me feel real. Time became a cruel thing, too short to plan everything perfectly, too long to sit still and do nothing. Straightening, I forced my expression into a mask of composure. It felt foreign, like putting on someone else's jacket. The mirror still reflected the tired version of me, bags under my eyes, dull hair, sallow skin, but under it all was something raw. Fear, yes, but the stubbornness that had kept me alive this long was still there. I would take it. I was an alpha blood and we didn't give up easily, even when we were afraid. Closing my eyes, I focused on the memory of Dad carrying me through the tunnels when I was small. An expedition into secret, dusty corridors that smelled of earth and oil and his work boots. I recalled the way my hand fit into his bigger one, the low thrum of his laugh, the lantern light painting the stone a honey colour. I clung to the memory like a life raft. Those passages beneath the floorboards were my only way out. First, though, I had to make sure Uncle Patrick couldn't touch the one thing that was legally and irrefutably mine, my inheritance. My dad had appointed Uncle Patrick as the chief trustee. On paper, it made sense. He was my closest remaining relative after all. What my uncle didn't know, though, was that Dad had been careful, maybe even paranoid. He had left me several contingencies, one of which was a way to remove any trustee if the settlor, my dad, authorized it, even posthumously. I padded back to my desk and switched on the desk lamp. My laptop hummed awake, the screen's glow lit up my face. I told myself I was only being practical, that this was necessary. Still, my heart pumped so loud I was afraid the whole signature blocks and legal clauses were less terrifying than staged accidents. Taking a breath, I opened the trust's portal and logged in with my father's credentials. My parents had always trusted me to use their accounts for small things, utility bills, and that one-off landlord query, so the password was something I knew by heart. I typed it in with trembling hands, knowing there would be no turning back from this. The dashboard came up showing a grid of accounts, beneficiaries and trustees. My name was the beneficiary, and Uncle Patrick's was in the trustee column, with a neat little column marked authority beside it. Nausea rolled within me when I saw his name, realizing the power it represented. I clicked the link to the legal documents, the will, the trust deed, and an addendum labeled Settlor's Contingency Protocol. My father's neat, looping signature stared back at me from the scanned copy. There was a clause, bracketed in legalese but with one sentence that cut through everything else. In the event the settlor deems a trustee unfit, the settlor may execute a revocation token, which shall, upon presentation and verification, remove said trustee without further consent. Beneath that paragraph was an attached encrypted file named revocation_token. Enc. My stomach dropped and then oddly steadied. My father had left this for me. He'd thought of everything. I hesitated. The portal asked for a passphrase to unlock the file. I remembered Dad hunched over his desk, mouthing phrases, testing patterns. I typed the phrase, the name of a song he used to whistle while sanding the floorboards. The file was decrypted. Inside was a single PDF and a short audio file. The PDF contained a notarized declaration in my father's handwriting and a string of alphanumeric code. The token. The audio was just him, recorded, reading the token aloud and ending with, "For Leah. Use it only if they try to take what's yours." My fingers shook so badly, and tears filled my eyes so that the token blurred on the screen. The portal offered an option, present revocation token with a bright, irreversible button beneath it. I swallowed the lump, then clicked it. A confirmation dialogue popped up, standard, boring again with the lawyer speak. It required me to enter a reason and authorize the revocation. There was a small checkbox I almost missed. I understand that all trustee parties will be logged and notified upon execution. My chest tightened. If I executed this, the system would notify them, and my uncle's name would light up like a flare. He'd know immediately. I knew he would confront me. He might even accelerate whatever plan they'd settled on. But doing nothing felt worse. Even if my plans worked out and I escaped, he could still find a reason to take my inheritance, to strip him of the legal power to act than to leave it in his hands. I typed a terse reason, settle authorized revocation per attached token, and pasted the code into the box. For a heartbeat, nothing happened but the whir of the laptop fan and the far-off tick of the grandfather clock. Then the page refreshed, and the trustees column updated. Uncle Patrick's authority flag changed from active to revoked, pending notification. A small banner appeared across the top of the screen. Execution successful. Notification queued to trustees. Audit log will reflect Executor Leah O'Connell at 22:14. Heat flooded my face. I had done it. I had the comfort of one small, unarguable victory, but the feeling was short-lived. The portal's note was explicit. All trustees would be notified immediately, which meant that the very people plotting my accident would soon know their power was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs as a dozen dark futures flashed in my head. I closed the laptop and slid my hands over the quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and my mother's laundry. The token was active now. Legally, Uncle Patrick couldn't move the shares. Practically, he could still plan. He could still act. I had taken a line of defense, but in doing so I'd lit a match. The house could go up in flames at any moment. The tunnels under the floorboards were no longer just an option but a necessity, and more dangerous than ever. Dashing to a side drawer, I took out a folder with all my necessary documents and shoved it into my bag. I tucked the laptop into the backpack and listened hard, waiting for any sign that they'd seen the notice. Picking up my father's old alarm clock from the nightstand, I shoved it in along with the quilt. Then I slipped into my closet, my ears listening hard to the sounds in the house. With trembling hands, I pushed aside the clothes in the middle and searched for the latch that opened the secret passage. Liath, my uncle's voice echoed through the house. "What have you done?" I flinched. I should have executed the revocation after my escape, but what was done was done. I depressed the latch. It clicked, sounding too loud. For a moment the house seemed to hold its breath. Most rooms were soundproofed against eavesdropping, thick plaster with cork between it, and the windows were double glazed. I shouldn't have heard anything but a muffled rumble. Instead, my name cut through in perfect clarity. Panic set my limbs to jelly. I grabbed the small opening and shoved my shoulders through. The back panel gave way to a narrow space of dry, cool, musty air. For a breathless second, I was suspended between two worlds, the safe light of my room and the dark passage leading below. I forced my hands to move, not thinking, only doing. I tugged the clothes back into place, making sure they lay neat and undisturbed. Then I closed the panel and slid the small door flush with the frame. A muffled thump came from the hall, shoes on the hardwood floor. Voices drifted to me, my aunt's clipped and calm, my uncle's deeper, angry and tight. My heart hammered against my chest. The darkness of the passage pressed against my face like cold cloth. I kept my breathing shallow, telling myself to slow down, to calm down. There was no turning back now. I slid my backpack on, fingers fumbling to secure the strap, and made my way through the passage. I came to the top of some stairs, steep and narrow. With my hand against the wall, I made my descent. The stairs seemed to go on forever. Even though I had brought a torch with me, I couldn't risk lighting it. The scent of earth and old oil filled my nostrils, calming me, and I smiled. The house above was in chaos, doors opening, feet hurrying all over. I pressed my shoulder against the stone, letting the cool damp soothe me for a long, steadying count. I moved deeper, toward the dark and the uncertain, and away from a life that had suddenly become too dangerous. Chapter 3. 2 days at least, I think it has been that long. I lost count somewhere between the second and third sleepless night, but the number didn't matter so much as the gnawing in my gut. Hunger had become a constant companion, a hollow ache that clawed my stomach and made my hands shake when I moved. In my panic, I'd forgotten to take any food. I had packed a couple of bottles of water, though, 2 warm bottles that had become a treasure in my backpack. I had drunk the water only when thirst threatened to double me over, all of which told me I wasn't fit for life on the run. Like I hadn't known that before, it just brought home how useless I was, more than I had thought. I kept moving. The certainty of death that I had left behind kept me moving. It kept my mind from unraveling. My torch had died on me, and even though I could see well in the dark, it was oppressive, threatening to leave me as a screaming mess. At last I came to the ladder at the end of the tunnel. It rose out of the earth like a spine, its iron rungs bolted deep into rough concrete, slick with damp. Rust gnawed at the edges, staining the walls in jagged streaks of brown. The tunnel stretched into darkness behind me, heavy with the stale reek of stone and old dust. But here, at the base of the ladder, there was a faint promise. Overhead, a round hatch broke the monotony of grey. The air here smelled different, cleaner. It smelled like the memory of rain. My pulse quickened. The ladder wasn't just an exit, it was a boundary. Climbing it meant leaving the suffocating silence of the underground and my life forever, and going into the unknown above, a place I had only dared to imagine. The metal groaned faintly as I tested my weight on the first rung. The sound echoed in the close space like a warning. My heart thudded harder, louder than the noise itself. Still, I started climbing. The iron rungs were slick with condensation under my palms as I hauled myself up, each cold biting through the sweat on my skin. My legs burned halfway. Each pull felt like hauling something heavier than my own weight. Fear, fatigue, the sum of all the small betrayals my body had committed these last 2 days. They screamed. I screamed as I almost fell, my arms wrapping against one of the rungs. I clung until my thighs stopped trembling and forced my heart to slow to the cadence of my breath. I counted 1, 2, 3, until my shaky body steadied enough for me to continue. When my hand found the hatch's latch, it took more strength than it should have to pry it free. The metal sighed as if it had been holding its breath for me, then gave. Brutal light hit me like a physical blow, and I winced. It wasn't the soft, forgiving light of dawn. It was a clean, clinical brightness that washed the tunnel out of existence in an instant. That made my eyes water. I staggered out, my hands flying to shield my eyes. For a dizzy second the world was a white blur, then colour fought its way back. The autumn colours, reds, yellow and rich greens, blues, the sharp edge of a sky, the scent of grass like a blade through fog. I wanted to laugh and sob at once. I wanted to kneel and kiss the earth. I wanted to vomit from the sudden, glorious intensity of it all. Beyond the hatch, the air was open and sharp and tasted like rain and something else. Metal and ozone, the subtle hum of power that always sat at the edge of the barrier magic. My chest expanded until it hurt. I took one long breath and let it out slowly, the air filling the parts of me the tunnel had left empty. A rabbit crossed the small clearing a dozen yards away and froze, ears pricking. For a second, it looked right at me, then melted into the underbrush. I had forgotten how hungry I was until the small, insistent pang the creature's presence ignited in me. The scent of magic was so potent in the air that I realized I had to be close to the barrier. Panic burned within me. What if I had come out inside the barrier? Would the barrier sensors pick up the shift in pressure or scent when the hatch opened? Were the alarms going to go off? My eyes scanned around me, my heart in my mouth. There was no patrol in sight. In front of me, just a few steps away, was the barrier. It shimmered, almost like a heat warp. A sob escaped me, tears running down my face as my knees went weak. I was out. I was beyond their immediate reach. It would take them a while to realize I was beyond the barrier. And right now, even if a warrior stood in front of me on the other side of the barrier, they wouldn't see me. I was free. Crouching in the hatch's shadow, I pushed my hair back from my face and checked my pack like a woman performing a ritual. The old alarm clock was there, its face scratched but faithful. The quilt smelled of cedar and home and made my throat hurt. My laptop was tucked deep in the pack. I had also packed a couple of clothes changes. I had reset my phone and left it in my room, knowing they could track me with it. My laptop, though, was a gift from my mom, who had been good with them and had ensured it was untraceable. I stood up and put my pack onto my back again. Closing my eyes, I let myself breathe in for a moment longer, grateful and terrified in equal measure. The world outside the tunnel was loud with life, birdsong, the wind through the grass. My belly growled in complaint, and I pressed a hand to it, promising, foolishly out loud, one thing at a time. Then I slid the hatch and closed it behind me, careful to leave no mark, and peered over to the shimmer of the barrier. Before it, the land was open fields, and a ribbon of road led to the wider world. I started moving, the sun warm on my face while my mind ran through options. I had to find food first, then a place to wash, and find a town where no one knew my name. Anything and everything felt both possible and impossibly far. I swallowed. 2 days underground had corroded my nails. I was tired, thinner, raw-edged, but I needed to get out of here. I reached the black ribbon through the fields, sun-baked and upward sloping. I snuck through the hedgerow and hugged it, keeping close to where the grass made a narrow, soft corridor. I didn't look back. The barrier was behind me now, a world that I could no longer see into and hopefully which could not see into me ever again. That thought made my throat tight. I could forget about going to college now, but that world could no longer reach me. That was all that mattered. My steps were small at first, careful to conserve my energy and my breath steady. I kept my hearing normal, but every sound registered loudly. A skylark, a tractor's distant rasp, the soft clack of my boots on the tarmac. My pack, when I tightened the straps, became the only solid thing I had. Hunger still gnawed at me like an impatient animal. It sharpened my focus until I was chanting in my mind, "Find food, wash, find shelter, don't draw attention." I moved with stealth, keeping low so the scrub hid me from the road's sightline while giving me a quick route if I needed to duck out. I scanned the fields ahead for movement, people, dogs, cars. There was nothing, only distant heads and the slow, steady smoke from a cottage chimney half a mile off. A patch of nettles snagged my trousers, and I cursed under my breath, more at the sting of the distraction than the plant itself. My fingers fumbled at the hem, more clumsy than before. Small things like untangling fabric felt suddenly monumental. I forced the hands to be useful. I checked the zipper on my pack and palmed my small Swiss knife. The road curved and I could see movement now, a solitary cyclist on the far stretch pedaling toward the town. He passed without glancing toward me. Relief and a new fear rose together. People didn't look at me. That would be safer, but it also meant I was alone, invisible. I let him slip by, then moved on. My eyes drank in the ordinary signs of human life. Mailboxes leaning at odd angles, tire tracks that cut the verge in neat ruts, a discarded soda can fluttering in a ditch. It made me ache as I remembered how normal life had been for me and my parents. By the time the village took shape, first a cluster of stone walls, then a low line of roofs, my legs had found a steadier rhythm. The air changed as I entered the outskirts. It carried frying oil, wet laundry, someone's laundry detergent, wild and clean, and the soft, sour undertone of a market. My skin prickled and I sneezed. Civilization broadcast itself differently than nature. It had texture and weight, too much for my werewolf senses. I went over the hedge again and walked into the village. I skirted the main street and took the lane that led to the back of the shops. There were people in small knots outside a grocer, their conversations a wash of ordinary concerns that felt almost obscene against my recent life and death situation. When a child darted past and nearly collided with me, I squeezed my pack closer and let her bump into my arm. Her mother muttered an apology and pulled her away, and I realized I'd held my breath until the danger passed. Closing my eyes for a second, I gave myself the easiest plan of action. No questions, no explanations. If asked, I was a traveler who had slept poorly. If someone offered a place to stay, I would refuse. The village was too close to the werewolf enclave, easy to track. I needed warmth, a place that didn't require me to be skilled at anything more than opening my mouth. The bakery's window was fogged with steam, and a bell jingled when I pushed the door. Warmth hit me in the face, soft and yeasty, and the smell of bread wrapped itself around my ribs like a hand. People glanced up and then away, absorbed in their own little worlds. I found a corner table, one that let me watch the door and the street without being the center of attention. My hands moved before my head told them to. I reached for the zipper on my pack and found, tucked in the inside pocket, a small amount of cash. My fingers shook as I took it out. A waitress came over to me and smiled, her apron dusted faintly with flour. "Hi, what can I get for you?" she asked, voice light and friendly. I tried to smile back, though it felt stiff on my face. "Hello," I croaked, my voice rusty from disuse. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Can I have some, My eyes flicked to the chalkboard above the counter, its neat white scrawl listing things I hadn't tasted in what felt like years. Everything looked like a miracle. A slice of whatever's freshest, and a cup of tea, please. I would rather have had a cappuccino, but I wanted to sleep soon and couldn't afford to drink anything with caffeine. "Sure thing," she said with an easy nod. "We've got honey cake, apple turnovers, or fresh sourdough with butter. Tea's black unless you'd like herbal." The words washed over me like music, my mouth watering. I swallowed hard, pulse quickening with the shame of wanting everything. "The turnover, please, and black tea." Coming right up. She jotted it down on a pad, though there was no need, then gave me another smile and walked back toward the counter. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. The smell of warm sugar and cinnamon was already drifting toward me, teasing, tugging at the hollow in my stomach. I pressed my thighs together under the table, forcing myself not to devour the empty air. When the waitress returned, she set a small plate in front of me. Steam curled from the golden pastry, its crust glistening with sugar. Beside it, a mug of tea, the liquid dark and fragrant, wisping heat into the cool bakery air. "There you go, let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you," I whispered, hoping she couldn't hear the crack of desperation under the word. The first bite nearly broke me. The pastry shattered softly against my tongue, the apple filling hot and sweet, a rush of cinnamon and butter that filled my whole chest. I closed my eyes, tears burning. I forced myself to chew slowly to make it last, though my body wanted to inhale every crumb. I sipped the tea, the bitter warmth steadying me, grounding me. My hands steadied around the mug as if it were the only real thing in the world. For the first time in days, the gnawing inside me loosened its grip. I sat there, back against the wooden chair, letting the simple miracle of hot tea and food sink into me. Around me, the bakery hummed with ordinary life, people talking, a child laughing, the clatter of plates, and I let myself imagine, just for a fragile moment, that I belonged here. It wasn't enough to sate my hunger, but I knew humans didn't have the appetite of a wolf. If I ate more than a human female did, I would draw attention, and one thing werewolves didn't do when humans were around was draw attention. Outside, the world went on, cars, a bus coughing on diesel, someone slamming a car door. Inside, there were ordinary lives simmering at an easy pace. For a moment, I allowed myself the ridiculous luxury of thinking I could be one of them. But survival is practical work. Well, the edges, but not the danger. I would need a place to go long-term, a story, and soon, the money I had on me would run out. I finished my food, then bought some scones to take with me before leaving. When I stepped back onto the street, I walked toward the long line of terraces where I planned to find an inn and scrub the tunnel off my skin. Each step was still cautious, but my chest no longer felt hollow. Chapter 4. I stayed in the inn for 3 days. Fear had become a physical thing within me, keeping me here. It shackled me to the sagging mattress, leaving me shuttered within the thin curtains. The room smelled of stale perfume and disinfectant, the kind of clean that would have been fine for a human but not for my werewolf senses. For me, it left a bitter taste in the back of my throat. Outside, the village went on in soft, indifferent rhythms, mowers, a dog that barked every afternoon, a postman who never looked up. Inside, time stagnated like water in a clogged sink. Yet I stayed. The first day, I barely left the bed. I took a shower, standing under the hot water until the skin on my shoulders prickled and the scratches from the tunnel strung. Soap scraped off days of grime, but it couldn't wash away the feeling of being hunted. I scrubbed my hair until the shampoo ran clear, as if rinsing could make me disappear. Afterwards, I sat on the edge of the tub, wrapped in a towel, listening for the sound of boots on the corridor. None came. On the second day, I ventured out for coffee, bad, burnt coffee from a vending machine in the lobby. Afterwards, I sat in the car, watched the road through a pair of sunglasses I'd thrown into my backpack on a whim. I watched faces without letting them see me watching. Men with lunchboxes walked by, an old woman with a shopping trolley, a teenager with headphones. Ordinary people, ordinary distances between them and the lone wolf I had become. Each one was a small, steadying proof that nothing for the moment was coming against me. It was only a matter of time, though. I kept busy in small ways that became ritualistic. My laundry was done in the inn's coin machine, and I folded the clothes with slow, methodical fingers until each item was a small, ordered thing. I bought a map and made lists, food, routes out, names of towns down the road, and folded them into the pocket of my jacket. Emptying my pack, I opened and checked my laptop's battery, then the maps and weather, anything that would help me pick a direction without leaving a trail. My fingers hovered over keys and then withdrew. I would not make easy marks for them to follow. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in shards. Every noise, pipes, the distant rumble of tires, the inn's old heater kicking on, made me jump upright and listen until my ears burned. Once, in the middle of a feverish dream, someone knocked at the door. My body went taut, every muscle coiled. I barely breathed as the sound repeated, soft and patient. My imagination conjured uniformed enforcers, radios, and questions. I pressed my palms to my ears and listened until the knock faded into the fabric of the building. When I finally peered through the peephole, there was only a maintenance worker with a clipboard, 20 feet away under the sodium streetlight. My hands shook for an hour afterwards. People still tried to care for me. A waitress from the bakery, her name badge read Maggie, Dropped off a paper cup of soup the second day. She smelled like home. "You okay, love?" she asked, voice soft. I nodded, thanked her, and almost told her everything. Instead, I took the cup with both hands and let the warmth seep into my palms. Small kindnesses felt like contraband. It was painful to realize I hadn't experienced them in a long time. I accepted them like fragile bargains, something that could be given in an instant. But they were also a curse. They tempted me to stay when I knew I couldn't. On the third day, the ache of inaction became a different kind of terror. Staying still felt less like safety and more like surrender. I might not be able to shift, but I was still a werewolf, a being that needed the outdoors. Each hour I remained in that room increased the odds of someone tracking me. I looked at my reasons for staying and found them brittle. Fear, exhaustion, the sticky comfort of anonymity, and the small kindnesses I was receiving. I needed to leave. I packed slowly, as if the careful motion would give me some courage. I wrapped the quilt around my shoulders one last time, feeling the cedar-scented thread hum between thumb and palm. Then I packed it and the laptop. The clock went into the side pocket, then the rations I had bought. Leaving the room, I slid the key under the lobby plant. The clerk never looked up as I passed. He was busy with the crossword in the front desk light. The morning air hit me like a slap when I stepped out. It was sharp and clear, and it made my lungs work like they hadn't in days. I kept my head down, my hood up, and walked the lane towards the east and the docks. With each footfall, the inn sank behind me, a small rectangle of rented safety that had given me 3 days of life and nowhere to hide. My heart hammered, not from exertion but from the simple act of leaving. I quickened my pace and didn't look back. As I walked on, the village unfolded around me in a way that felt almost like a memory, familiar in its simplicity, foreign in every detail. Narrow lanes curved between rows of old stone cottages, their walls washed pale by salt and wind. Window boxes spilt over with hardy flowers, geraniums and trailing ivy, their colours bright against the weathered grey. Doors were painted in cheerful defiance of the climate. Deep blues, scarlet reds, mustard yellows, each one chipped from years of Atlantic storms. The air tasted faintly of salt and peat, damp and alive, and every breath felt different from the stale, recycled air of the motel room. The sea was everywhere, not just in the sharp tang on the wind, but in the soundscape that wrapped the village. Gulls wheeled overhead, crying against the steady hush of waves breaking somewhere beyond the rooftops. Even the cobblestones beneath my boots bore the story of the coast, slick in places from sea spray, rimmed with tiny flecks of white where dried salt had crystallized after rain. It was small, impossibly small compared to the cities I had known in werewolf territory. One main street threaded through its heart, flanked by a hodgepodge of shops and cafes. There was a butcher with hooks gleaming in the window, a bookshop whose front door stuck when opened, a bakery sending ribbons of warm sugar and cinnamon into the cool morning air. A little pub squatted at the corner near the harbour, its sign swinging lazily in the breeze, promising stew and stout to anyone who crossed its worn threshold. I passed a row of laundry lines strung between houses like bunting, sheets flapping like sails, sweaters heavy and slow to dry. People were out already, despite the chill. A woman sweeping her stoop, an old man tossing breadcrumbs to a cluster of pigeons that waddled hopefully after him. They glanced at me with mild curiosity, not suspicion, just the easy awareness that comes from knowing every face in a small place. I kept my head down and my steps measured, willing myself to be unremarkable. Down toward the harbour, the cobblestones gave way to worn wooden planks, damp underfoot and flecked with gull droppings. Fishing boats bobbed in the narrow inlet, their hulls painted in bright but peeling colours, turquoise, vermilion, sea green, and their names written in curling Irish script. Ropes creaked softly against the tide, and the faint metallic clang of rigging chimed like wind bells. The sea itself was a deep slate blue today, restless but not angry, rolling in long, even breaths against the breakwater. The wind caught the edges of my hair as I walked, carrying with it the smell of salt, diesel, fish, and wet rope. A strange, grounding mix that clung to everything here. It wasn't a postcard village. It was a living one, worn smooth by centuries of tide and toil. And as I moved through its crooked streets and weather-beaten heart, part of me felt small and invisible enough to disappear. That was what I needed, to be another nameless figure on a windy Irish street, walking toward nowhere in particular. Now I just had to find a boat out of here. The thought itself was shaky, absurd even. I had no plan, no destination, no idea what lay beyond this stretch of sea. But anywhere was better than here. Anywhere was better than being trapped on the edge of that cursed barrier. The harbour stretched ahead, boats rocking in their berths, and I spotted a squat whitewashed office with peeling paint near the pier. A faded sign over the door read tickets and charters. My pulse steadied at the sight. That was where I would go. I could buy passage to England, to France, it didn't matter. The rest I'd figure out later. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets and started toward it, my boots clattering softly on the cobblestones. Seagulls screeched overhead, shadows darting over the stone walls. I passed an alley, its narrow mouth shadowed between two buildings, and thought nothing of it, until a hand shot out. I didn't even have time to gasp. Cold fingers clamped over my mouth, yanking me backward. I tried to twist, to scream, but the sound was smothered against a calloused palm. My legs kicked out, boots scraping the cobblestones, but an arm banded around my waist and lifted me clear off the ground. Quiet, a rough voice hissed in my ear. Another figure appeared, broad-shouldered, and together they dragged me into the alley. Panic surged hot in my chest, thrashing through me. I bit down hard on the hand muffling me, but the man only grunted and tightened his grip, shoving me toward a side door I hadn't even noticed. The world narrowed to noise and struggle, my breath sharp in my throat, the scrape of shoes on stone, the slam of the door shutting behind us. Then a chair, hardwood, my wrists jerked behind me. Rough rope dug into my skin, my ankles bound fast. By the time I caught my breath, I was tied, pinned, and glaring into the dimness of a bare room. One of them sat across from me. His face was sharp, hawkish, with eyes that seemed too pale in the gloom. His voice was measured, heavy with authority. "Liath o Sluaghain," he said, the name striking me like a blow. "You have been accused of leaving the enclave without permission and of endangering our kind." Fear shot through me, icy and absolute. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to crack them. They knew who I was, they knew my blood. No, I forced the panic down, clung to the memory of what I was. "You're alpha blood. You don't bow, you don't break." I lifted my chin, shaking my head defiantly, though my wrists trembled against the ropes. The man didn't pause. His words rolled on, heavy, damning. "You are to face the Enclave Council. They will decide your fate." His mouth kept moving, but the words seemed to slide past me, warped and hollow. My fear spiked, tightening like a coil inside my chest, until it was too sharp, too loud. Then something broke. The pressure inside me surged outward, wild and violent, and with it came sound. Not my voice, something deeper, rawer. A sonic wave ripped out of me in a shattering blast. The air trembled, the walls quivered. The men staggered, their hands clutching at their heads as blood spilled from their ears. Their bodies crumpled, unmoving, the chairs they had sat on skittering across the floor. My own chair shattered beneath me. Ropes split apart like threads. I collapsed to the floor, the world ringing in my ears. My hands were free, trembling, my breath soaring in and out as though I'd just outrun a storm. The room was chaos, overturned furniture, unconscious bodies, the metallic tang of blood in the air. I pressed my palms flat against the ground, heart still racing, and stared wide-eyed at what I'd done. I was free, but what was I? Clearly I wasn't a wolf, so what was I?